You don't have to wash your hands. I have so much time to myself. Hey, walk away when I'm talking to you. My kids really respect my privacy. When this timer goes off, please turn it off and do not tell me. Thanks. Here, can you use up all my battery? Don't call me when you get there. I don't want to know where you are. It is just too quiet in this car. Okay, we're about to leave for church, so if you're going to make a huge mess, you better do it now. I don't know. Your dad usually does everything around here. All of these people are such good drivers. Eating dinner is completely optional. Hanging up your towel is completely optional. Flushing the toilet is completely optional. Okay, this time, can you smile more like a crazed lunatic? Hey, you want to dig through the fridge for the 5th time today? I'd definitely rather be here than at the beach. I am loving the look of these chips on the floor. I am loving the smell of your feet in my face. I am loving this back pain. Get a massage, ew. No thanks. Take anything you want from my closet and don't worry about putting it back. Don't look at the camera. Look over there. If your sister takes your toy, just give her a good smack on the head. Hey, come drink that grape juice in here on the carpet. It's dinner time. Everybody come get a snack. Hey, did you know you can wear the same pair of underwear all week long?
Kids, you're almost dismissed, but first say, "We love you, moms." Kids? Oh yeah, you guys can do, come on. Kids, say, "We love you, moms." All right, halfway good. Get out of here. Kids, you are dismissed. Just a couple of quick announcements. Happy Mother's Day, by the way. And you moms, we do have a gift for you out in the lobby on your way out. So if you are a mother with children, please grab that on your way out the door. And I'll try to remind you again in our closing remarks. A couple of quick announcements. Starting this week, our young adults are going to start a new community group, May the 11th, meeting right here in this space at 7:30 p.m. following our regular youth group. For that 7:30 to 9 p.m., but I know you guys are older and don't have curfews, so it'll probably go later than that. You guys have fun. I think it's going to be a great group. We got a couple great leaders heading that up, and I know most of you are aware of that. Next, if you want to invite a friend to church, we do encourage you to do that. There's these little squares out there that are invites, just have our address and whatnot on it. They're simple. Put them in your wallet or your purse, and you can carry those with you. And if you see somebody when you're out and about and you want to invite them, hand them that card. It's the easiest way to go. Last but not least, our two more things. Food pantry out in the lobby. If you need food tonight, you're welcome to take anything you want from that and as much as you want from that. If you have the availability to donate food to that pantry, we ask that you do that, whether it's granola bars or peanut butter or toiletry items or whatever. It's take what you need, leave what you can type situation, and it's available to everyone, including all of the recovery groups who meet here throughout the week. I believe we have 4 of those still meeting in our facility throughout the week. And last but not least, if you want to give in other ways, if you want to give financially to Refuge and partner with us in our mission to this community, you can do so by texting. You can do so through a safe in the back of the room and just drop a check or cash in that, or you can do so online. We are in week 3 of 4 in a series through the book of Esther, and we called this series Hidden God. And I just want to start this week where we left off last week with that quote that I read at the very end of the sermon. It's C.S. Lewis from his book Mere Christianity, which you haven't read. I still encourage you to do so. And he says this. He says, "Give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. Submit to death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day, and you will find eternal life. Hold back nothing." It's going to kind of be our theme as we go through this section this evening. I'll just catch you up if you haven't been here for a few weeks, or maybe if you're like me, you have a bad memory. If this was a TV show, this is where that announcer with a deep voice would say, "Previously on Esther, Hidden God." Here's what's happened. The Jews, they are living in dispersion. They are not in their promised land. They are spread out throughout the countryside. The story for this story is going to center in on 2 Jews in particular that are living in the Persian Empire. One is named Mordecai, and then his cousin who her parents died and he adopted her, named Esther. There's a king in the story, King Xerxes, and the story starts out with him throwing a big party. It lasts 187 days. This is a serious party. At the end of that party, he invites his wife, the queen, Vashti, in for his buddies to stare at and lust after. And she's like, ain't gonna do it. She refuses. It's unacceptable to the king, so he has her removed from the throne. And then what we see in the story is a string of coincidences that just kind of play through. Xerxes, now he wants a new queen. And so he holds, we're going to say for children's ministry, a beauty contest, but it's not a beauty contest. Esther is beautiful. She happens to be the king's type. They sleep together. He chooses her as the new queen, but she hides her identity as a Jew. That's important to the story, especially for tonight. Mordecai, her cousin, he rises to a position of power in the empire. And in that position of power, inside the city gates, he stumbles upon an assassination attempt of the king. And he tells some people, and he actually saves the king. Last week, we were introduced to the villain of the story, Haman the Agagite. He's the second most powerful man in all of the land. But he's full of pride, he's full of racism, he's full of rage. And Haman, he's so powerful, he walks through the streets, and the king says everybody must bow to Haman, but Mordecai refuses to bow. And we don't know why he refuses to bow, he just refuses to bow. And so this upsets Haman. He says, I'm not going to just kill Haman, I'm actually going to kill his entire race, which is the Jewish race. And so now there is a genocide out against the Jews. The king gives Haman his signet ring. It's like full authority. It's giving the nuclear codes to Haman, saying, you do whatever you want. And they issue this decree. And by the way, throughout this whole story to this point, and there will be to the end, there is no mention of God. No burning bushes, no prophecies, no prayer, no mention of God. That's why we call this series Hidden God. And so we finished last week, chapter 3, verse 13. It says, dispatches were sent into all the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, annihilated on a single day. And so it is bleak for the Jews. It is looking hopeless. It looks like it is the end. And that's where we pick up tonight in chapter 4. And we're going to cover the entire chapter, verse 1. It says, when Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes. He put on burlap and ashes and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. Now, it's not 2022. People in this time period did not have a lot of clothes. So tearing the few clothes that you have is a big deal. And then he puts on burlap. If you don't know, it's made out of like goat hair or camel hair. It's not super comfortable. He puts on these ashes so it is visible that he is mourning. And so this is not a, hey, buddy, is something bothering you? This is clear. He is in distress. He is in pain. He has anger and sorrow. And then it says he left the city. Mordecai was previously in the citadel. It's like a city within the city. It's a city on top of a hill. It's about 120 feet up. And that little city in a city would be the pinnacle of culture. It was the center of power. It's the place where ideas were shaped. It's hip. It's modern. It's the place you want to be. Mordecai was on the inside, but he's left the city. And so now he's an outsider. Verse 3, as the news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many lay in burlap and ashes. And so what Mordecai does now, his people do. There's this deep grief that they know a death sentence is upon their people. Verse 4 says, when Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she too was deeply distressed. Weird response. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap. And so Esther is like, Mordecai, what are you wearing? You look poor. Some of you know where that comes from. She's essentially being really superficial in this response. She's saying, oh, what's wrong? I mean, come on, put on this nice suit from our royal tailor and all will be well. See, Esther is upset, we're told, but she's not upset because her people are under judgment of the king. She's upset simply because her cousin's upset. I mean, Esther is now a child of the empire. She's all in. She's accepted their values, their culture, and so she superficially thinks she can fix this problem by giving Mordecai a new set of clothes. But we're told Mordecai refused it. Verse 5, then Esther sent to Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was in mourning. So now she's saying, well, let's figure this out. And what we're going to find in this story now, and I think the writer does a really good job of building this tension, It's kind of this back and forth conversation. They're going to talk over here, it's Mordecai, and then it's going to go over here, and it's going to talk to Esther. One is inside the palace, the place of superiority. One is outside the palace. One is here living in comfort, and one is over here in mourning and distress. And so the writer is going to create this tension in this conversation between these two different people in two different positions. Verse 7, Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destructions of the Jews. Verse 8, Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king, to beg for mercy, and to plead for her people. Since Esther's parents have died, Mordecai has been like a father to her. And because of this, Esther has always done everything that Mordecai has told her to do. Throughout this story, over and over, what's he tell her to do? He says, keep your identity a secret. Don't let anybody know you're a Jew. And she has obeyed that. But now that's changed. What about this time? Mordecai tells her to go into the king's presence and beg for mercy for her people. And who are her people? It's the Jews. And so now the writer of this story, he's putting a question before us. What will Esther do? Will she openly acknowledge that the Jews are her people when identifying with them will come at a great cost to her, perhaps her life? Will she die to herself? Will she die to her royal ambitions? Will she die to her comfort? Or will she hold back? That's the question the writer is putting before us. Verse 9 says, so Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Then Esther told Hathach to go back, this back and forth thing, and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in this inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. The literal translation of that statement is, are you stupid? Everyone knows that if I come before the king uninvited, I'm probably going to die. But she's also saying, Mordecai, you don't know what you're asking of me. I've kind of made it here. I'm in a good place. I'm at the top of the food chain. And now you're asking me to throw all that away. I mean, you know what I went through to get here, right? You know what I compromised to get to this position. You know what was stolen from me so I could be where I'm at. And oh, by the way, it's been a while since the king has wanted to sleep with me. And I know he ain't sleeping alone. And so I'm already on treacherous ground here. Verse 13, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. That's a pretty powerful statement, but I want you to see this first. Something has changed inside of Mordecai. He was the guy who says, don't say you're a Jew. Don't tell anybody, just hide, live in comfort, but something's changed. I mean, he's the one who God has already called his people to come back home. And Mordecai's like, nah, we're going to stay right here in Persia. I mean, that's Mordecai. He's the one who has compromised his values throughout this story. He's the one who told Esther to lie about who she was. He's the one who last week picked the wrong battle to fight. We don't know why, but he wouldn't bow to Haman, but he let his daughter be sexually assaulted, or his stepdaughter. He never openly worships God in the story. He never talks about God in the story. He disobeys God because he's not going to the festivals. He's not eating the proper food. He's not following the dietary laws, but now he has faith, and it rises up to the surface. And the story doesn't tell us exactly what has turned in him. It's probably that his people are now going to be annihilated, but something has changed. And whatever that is that has changed inside of him, he's trying to get Esther to make that change. And so he says to her, don't you think because you're in the palace, or don't think because you're in the palace, you're going to escape. In other words, what he's saying is, don't miss what is happening in God's kingdom because you're too caught up in your own kingdom. Remember, that's the second half of that C.S. Lewis quote that I read to you earlier. The quote that I gave you, and this is the second half, it says, look to yourself
and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look to Christ, and you will find him, and with him everything else thrown in. And so where do you find your identity? Where do you find your identity? Is it in the palace? Because if it's in the palace, Mordecai says, well, you're pretty well as good as dead. Where do you find your identity? Is it in your resume? Is it in your career? Is it in your beauty? Is it in your position? Is it in your skin color? Is it in your political party? Do you find identity in your kids and in your family, or your IQ, or your religious performance? And the question that Mordecai is asking then is, if that's where you find your identity, are you willing to risk losing it, of giving it up? Mordecai says, if you don't risk losing the palace, you're going to lose everything. Jesus says something kind of similar to that later in Matthew 16. He says, for whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Let's keep going. Verse 14. Mordecai says this to Esther. He says, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. God's name might not be in this story anywhere, but that is a tremendous profession of faith. Mordecai says, God has made a promise to us that his people will be as numerous as the stars, as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore, that the world would be blessed through our people. And so Mordecai says, so I know that deliverance will come, that God will come through like he has always come through. That is a beautiful profession of faith. And then he says this, verse 14, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. That's the high point of this book. Narratively, theologically, that's where this book has led to. It's the peak that we have been building towards. And so I want to spend some time on that line. He says, who knows? It's the title of my sermon tonight, this working title this week, who knows? Because those are my favorite two words in this entire story. Who knows? Song we sang, I don't know how you make a way, but I know you will. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe, perhaps, possibly, I wonder. Those are not words we normally associate with a strong faith. But perhaps, possibly, maybe we should. I don't know. Maybe it's not all just coincidences. Perhaps everything has had a purpose in my life to this point. Who knows? Has God been working in this entire story? Emery, our youngest daughter, who was in here with us worshiping earlier, she's 10 years old. She's a storyteller. She's a future pastor, I'm sure. I'm certain of it. She'll be your pastor in 20 years here at Refuge, probably. Who screamed? Oh, gross. She's a storyteller, but here's the problem. You can't believe a lot of what she says in her stories. Because she likes to tell good stories, and that means she fills in all the details with stuff she just makes up out of thin air. It's been a problem. We've talked to her about this. Like, just keep it simple. Karen says, give me the dummy notes version of your story, Emery. This week, she's telling us a story at the kitchen table, and there was a detail, and I missed the detail, and so I asked her about it, thinking she's probably going to give me an answer, and you know what she said? She said, I don't know. I've never been more proud of her as a dad. I don't know. She was honest. I don't need to fill in the details. It's okay for us as Christians to say, who knows? It's okay to be a little clueless. It's okay to be pretty uncertain about things, because here's the thing. Little kid, we're told to have faith like little children, right? We ask a little kid, how's your mom make sure there's food on the table every night? I don't know, but I know it'll always be there. You ask a little kid, how can you be certain my mom is going to pick you up in the carpool line? Well, one, because she's not going to ask dad because he'll forget. Two, though, I don't know. Who knows? But I know she'll make sure I'm picked up tonight. We need to be okay not knowing. We got to stop wanting all the details before we decide what we're going to do for God or where we're going to move for God. And on top of that, we got to stop feeling the pressure to fill in all the gaps that we don't know about God and simply say, I don't know. God is hidden in this story. He's not mentioned one time. And yet Mordecai here makes a recommendation on what he thinks God might be doing. God is hidden in our stories. Every day, every second, every minute, every hour of every day, you got to make decisions based on a lot of maybes and a lot of guesses. And yes, if you're a baptized believer, you've got God's Holy Spirit living inside of you and he is guiding you. Can we be honest? We're still guessing much of the time. I don't know. What illustrates faith more, though? Knowing all the answers? Having certainty? Or having to trust God that God will come through no matter how many times you make the wrong guess? See, God doesn't need you to accomplish his purpose. He can accomplish it with or without you, but he wants you to help in accomplishing the purpose. He wants you to be a part of the action. And why does he want that? Again, we sang it. So he becomes more than words. He becomes more than good ideas so that we can see his love as we serve with him in the open fields. Who knows if perhaps by God's providence, you were made queen for such a time as this. You were made queen. Made. The translation from Hebrew actually is more, who knows, you were brought to be queen for such a time as this. You were brought to be king. And so what Mordecai is doing here is he is preaching the gospel of grace. He's saying, you didn't get to where you are for any other reason except by the grace of God. You didn't earn your beauty that got you here. God gave it to you. You don't deserve to be queen. God put you in that position. You won't save your people, but maybe God will use you to save his people. And so the question is, what royal position in his grace has God placed you in? I'll give you one. We live in America. And for people living outside of this country, I will tell you for sure, you're in a very royal position. You're living in the palace of the world, the center of wealth and power. And what'd you do to get into this position? Most of us, very little to nothing. So why are you in this position, this royal position of power and wealth? Do people living outside of our palace need your help? Whether that's immigrants or refugees or whatever. What about the church as a palace? Man, I was just thinking tonight as we were singing how much I truly love this church. Like it is my family, it is my friends, it is my church, but it can also become my palace where I want to get inside and hide. And so who has been left outside of this palace that God has brought us into? The LGBT community, the recovery community, the mental health community, those who have hurt by religion. Left on the outside, they need to be brought into the palace. What about you moms here tonight? Do you consider motherhood a royal position? That God placed you into that royal position. Saw a really cool article in the New York Times. It's gone around a few times. It's a job description for the dumbest job ever, motherhood. And it basically says you're self-employed, you don't get to work normal hours, and you have no boundaries. That's how it starts out for the job description. And then the author writes this. She says, this position manages to be one of the utmost importance, and yet somehow also the least visible and or respected in the entire organization. Although you will coordinate, plan, and do almost everything, you should expect to crash face first into bed every night feeling that you've accomplished basically nothing. To your kids, depending on their age, you moms are royalty. You are queens to those kids. But I will tell you that because of being with a mother and seeing my wife mother our children, motherhood is an opportunity to die to yourself over and over and over. And it starts with conception. I mean, your entire body is being consumed so that another human being can live. You are dying. As your child grows up, you get to experience emotional death through those teenage years, or as they go to college and it's killing you inside. And when they marry and you're like, oh, is this the right person? Or they try to kill you themselves with their bad decisions. You moms constantly are laying down your life so that others may live. But I'll tell you, you're in good company because that's the way of Jesus. Laying down our lives so that others can live. Joy filled with sorrow, fruitfulness filled with emptiness, life mixed with death. And so the verse again, who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. That's the famous line. That's the one that goes on the Hobby Lobby plaques that you hang up in your home. For such a time as this. Been watching on HBO, they've got a special called Showtime. It's a docudrama about the early Lakers in the 80s. And because of that, there's some buzz around the Lakers and the players or whatnot. And so on Apple TV now, they have a show called They Call Me Magic. And it's a 4-part documentary about Magic Johnson. It's been pretty fascinating. I finished it this week. Kind of goes through the 80s and the 90s. And, you know, Magic contracts the HIV virus. And at that time, there wasn't a lot known about AIDS. They only thought that it affected really the gay community. And so those living in their golden palaces thought, not my problem. Then we get to the final episode, and Magic Johnson contracts HIV. And all of a sudden, the conversation around the world is changed. All of a sudden, there's so much more funding for HIV and AIDS. And so as I thought about that, was Magic Johnson's sexual escapades ordained by God? No. Is Magic Johnson a Christian? I have no earthly idea. I didn't even Google it to check. Did God use such a time as this to begin dealing with death and destruction caused by a horrible disease? Perhaps. I mean, what's God's goal for this world? It's not just people going to heaven. If we read through the end of the Bible and we get to the book of Revelation, it says that God is to perfect this world. God is to heal everything that is wrong with this world. And so the story of the Bible is that our relationship with God is wrong. It is broken. Our relationship with each other, it's broken. That's why we have racism. That's why we have war. That's why we have oppression. Our relationship with nature is broken. That's why we have AIDS. And that's why we have hunger and sickness. And that's why we have death. And the Bible teaches God wants to heal all of that. The Bible teaches God will heal all of that. How's he going to do that? If you went to your doctor's office and, they got the little coffee table sitting there and the book's laying out and you're trying to figure out which one you're going to read and you look down and you see the one that says, the person God uses. That sounds interesting. What's that? Who's that book about? Must be a missionary, right? Or must be a preacher. Or maybe it's somebody started some Bible study in their church, but maybe the person God uses could just as easily be a banker or a beautician or a barista, or a teacher, or a mother, or a father, or a Christian, or even a non-Christian. There are 3 books in the Old Testament around God trying to bring his people back from the dispersion back into the promised land. The book of Ezra. Ezra is a teacher of the word. He is a preacher. He is preaching the gospel and trying to call the people back. But then you got Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah. He is an urban planner and developer. That's what he does to bring God's kingdom back. And then we get to the book of Esther. It's the 3rd one that is bringing God's people back. And here we have Esther. She's a hypocrite. We're not sure if she's Persian or Jew. She doesn't go to church. She doesn't obey God's commands. She doesn't pray. She doesn't seem to be able to make decisions for herself. But if this is the person that God can use to save his people from annihilation, can he not use you? I mean, exactly where you are right now. Your job, your neighborhood, your school, your church, your health. Can he not even use you as you sit there in your wounds? Your physical wounds, your emotional wounds you have from scars in life, your mental wounds that you have, your spiritual church wounds. Can he not use you in your wounds? Maybe we should stop hiding those wounds and seeing them as a source of shame and start seeing them as something God can use as a source of healing for both ourselves and for others. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. Verse 15, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. Sweet little Esther, known for her looks, known for her attractive figure, passive, compliant, no sign of faith, sold out to the culture around her. And now it's, if I die, I die. She's no longer passive. She is now going to swim against the current of the culture. She is fasting, which is connected to praying. She's now a woman with deep dependence upon God. What happened to Esther? What changed? She believed the message that Mordecai preached. She's taken a hold of God's grace. And when she's taken a hold of that, it's transformed her. And now she is beginning to die to herself. And when she dies to herself, that's when she is going to find life for her and her people. I heard an illustration this week on a podcast I was listening to. It says the distance of the earth to the sun. Imagine that as the thickness of a piece of paper. So from the earth to the sun, it's the thickness of a piece of paper. The distance then across our galaxy or to the nearest star would be a stack of papers 70 feet tall. That's the sun. So from us to the sun, that's a stack of papers 70 feet tall. It's a long ways. The distance across our galaxy would be a stack of papers 120 miles high. And then, of course, our galaxy and the universe is just one little galaxy, one little speck inside of a speck inside of a speck. And Jesus, the Bible says, holds all that together with the power of a word. And so is Jesus the kind of person you ask into your heart to be your personal assistant? I'll try you on. I'll see what you can do for me, little Jesus. Or is this the kind of person, if you believe that he exists, that you're like, I'm letting go. Let go of my life, and I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to say, if I die, man, I die. Here's my talents, here's my gifts, here's my abilities, here's my money. Use them. If I die, I die. I'm probably going to look like a fool doing this for you, Jesus. If I die, I die. I'm going to show that person love that is so unlovable. If I die, I die. Ephesians 2:10, we love verses 8 and 9 about God's grace, and then it finishes with this in verse 10, for we are his masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared in advance that we should walk in them. And I'll add, so we can even limp in them sometimes too. But I love that verse. I taught it to a group of elementary students one time. That word masterpiece, it's actually Greek poema. It's the word for poem, where we get poem. And essentially what it's saying is we are God's artwork. We are his masterpiece of art. He has crafted each and every one of us. He's crafted our lives. He's given us our strengths and our gifts and our weaknesses and our blessings and our sufferings and our positions in this world. And that means there are certain things he's called you to do, nobody else can do. Only you can do. Listening to the news this week and the changes with Roe versus Wade and what may come of that, I know there are families, maybe some here tonight, says, we can't conceive a child. Why would God do that to us? And I would respond, who knows? Perhaps there's a child out there that needs a home just like yours through adoption. And maybe that person answers, well, adoption is scary and it's expensive and a lot of things can go wrong. If I die, I die. And they move forward. And then you think about that decision, that one decision to bring that one child into their home that impacts that child, that impacts their kids, that impacts their kids and every person those kids touch. Don't think you can't change the world through a simple adoption. And I'll give you a little soapbox here. If Roe versus Wade really does go through, instead of holding up signs, I've been saying this all along, Christians better be ready to step up to the plate. That means you better prove that you are pro-life by proving it through adoption and proving and bringing these kids into our households. So we have an adoption fund here at Refuge. It's getting low. We've helped families through adoption. It's my fault. I haven't communicated it very well. So maybe tonight it's your calling to donate to that fund. You say, how much? I don't know. Take a risk. If you die, you die. Make it more than comfort. I'm going to close with this. And I have to, because it's important. This is an easy story to read, and it's an easy story to preach, where I can really push and say, you need to be like Esther. And we can feel that, right? And we can go one of two ways. It can bring guilt because we know we haven't been like Esther and we've had fear and we've been afraid to step out. Or maybe we can get in here tonight and it can kind of pump us up. That's what it's done for me this week. I get excited and motivated by seeing Esther in action and her dependence upon God. But if Esther is just an example, all it's going to do is play out and become just another way for religion to crush us. Because there's more going on to this story. We've called it the hidden God, but in this story, God moves from being hidden in the background, and he's moved right up to the front. And here's how that's happened. Esther has saved her people through two things. Number one, she identified with her people. Her people were condemned, so she identified with them. She is risking her life now to save them. She is willing to go before the king and experience his wrath and judgment. And because she identified with her people, now she can mediate on their behalf. She can go before the king's throne because she has a special position that no one else has. And in a way that the people could not do for themselves, she can mediate with the king. If you've been in church any length of time, I hope the comparisons are pretty obvious. A decree has been given. God's people have been condemned. The wage of sin is death. We need access, someone with access to the king. We need someone who would identify with us as his people. We need someone who would come before the throne and plead our cause to the king. Jesus lived in the ultimate palace. It's called heaven. He held the ultimate position of authority. He had ultimate beauty. He had the ultimate attention of the king. The Bible says he was actually considered equal with God. That's so much more than a title. And he left all that. Not because his cousin pressured him. No arguments back and forth in the Trinity. He came and he identified with his people, not at the risk of his life, but the guaranteed loss of his life. It's not if I die, but when I die, and I bring life to all. And so Romans 8, Paul writes, what shall we say about such wonderful things as this? We say, if God is for us like that, who can ever be against us? And then it becomes possible to say, if I die, I die. Because when I die to myself, to my stuff, to everything around me, that's when I live. I'm going to ask the band to come up. We're going to close tonight with a song. It's a different kind of song. Instead of a song of worship to God, it's actually a song of prayer to God. And so we're going to sing this prayer together tonight. And who knows, perhaps God has you right here, right now, where you are for such a time as this. And so as we sing, I want this prayer that we sing to be a blessing to all the moms, all you queens in the room tonight. I want it to be a blessing to you. But as we sing, let's also sing a blessing to that person that maybe felt that stir in their heart tonight, even if that someone is you. So let's stand and let's sing.